Right, so yes, thank you and welcome to our virtual roundtable webinar for delivering solutions and results with direct instruction. Today in this webinar, you'll get to hear from your peers about how they have used DI programs and the positive outcomes they have seen or are currently seeing. It's going to be a great session, and just to kick off, I will introduce myself. My name is Parveen Bambra. I am the Marketing Executive for Schools in the UK and Europe. And my colleague Emma Chambers, some of you may know her already. She is the account manager for schools. And before we get started, I'm just going to hand over to our other colleague, Afsana. She's going to take us through some quick housekeeping items, and then we'll get going with the discussion.
Parveen, can you just go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So just as Colin mentioned, we're going to cover off a bit of housekeeping just to make sure the experience is as seamless as possible for all our attendees. So just in terms of audio and sound, so if you can hear me, you've obviously connected to the audio, but if you are experiencing issues, do please drop a message in the chat box and I'll try to help you with that. Any kind of networking issues that you may have could be impacted by streaming or gaming platforms that might be used in the home as well. So do bear that in mind. In terms of attendees, you can't see one another, but you can use the chat box to engage with each other. All you need to do is to select the panelists and attendees where the drop down is next to 2, and then you can message there as well. There will be a Q&A at the end, and the session will be recorded and sent to you via email too. The next please. Thank you. As I mentioned, please do use the chat box and the Q&A. Unfortunately, we can't unmute you today or put your videos on, but use the chat box, drop your kind of comments, your points in there as well. And then there's also a Q&A box at the bottom, which you can select and then add in your questions there, and we will try to answer them each one as well.
Great, thank you so much, Afsana. I guess now I will introduce our speakers. So we've got 4 speakers today. First of all, also our host for this discussion is Sam Hall. He is a learning executive at Uplearn, and he is an avid DI blogger. And I'm sure you have seen some of his blogs on Twitter. If not, we can definitely shout out Sam's Twitter in this session for you to check that out. We've also got Riska Solomon. She is the founder and a board certified behaviour analyst at Skybound Therapies in Wales. And then we also have Jonathan Heap. He is the head teacher at Gloucester Academy, which is part of Greenshaw Learning Trust. And finally, we have Amina Jabbar, a teacher at Washwood Heath Academy based in Birmingham. Thank you all so much for being here. We're really excited to get going. So I will hand over to Sam to get us started.
Thanks, Parveen. I guess to start, it is a pleasure to be here virtually talking about DI. Now, I imagine some of you might have heard loads about Engelmann's DI programs or very little about Engelmann's DI programs. Either way, that's fine, since hopefully today we're going to be talking about kind of the more practical elements of choosing and implementing DI programs in whatever context you're working in. Before we actually dive in to doing that, I just think it's worth covering what programs or what DI programs are actually out there. So I believe if I ask for a slide, there we go. There's kind of a couple of ways of looking at it. The core Engelmann programs are in English and maths, and there's a split in terms of primary and secondary. So one of the questions that I get a lot, or we all get a lot about DI is it supposed to be for primary or for secondary? And the answer is it's for both. The main programs were developed at primary level. So they assume absolutely no knowledge of students at all. And they take them from no knowledge all the way up to kind of mastery in reading, writing, maths. And so if you're in a primary setting and you're thinking about Engelmann's programs, reading mastery, expressive writing, reading mastery is on there, and connecting maths concepts are sort of your core programs. And so if you hear that, that's what it's referring to. Whereas in secondary school, what we tend to hear a lot about is corrective reading and corrective mathematics. And as they sound, they're corrective programs for students that are perhaps behind their peers in terms of their attainment and attendance. So if you hear corrective reading and corrective mathematics today, and I know that some of the panelists teach those programs, we're referring to the secondary programs that are being taught in schools. But that doesn't mean that Engelmann is only limited to secondary school and corrective programs. There are whole programs out there starting at primary school that I really encourage you, if you're interested, to kind of sink your teeth into and get to know it. Okay, that's the intro. What I really want to do now is dive in and kind of talk about DI a lot. So to start with, it would be great to kind of get more of a background of our speakers and the kind of context they're in and the challenges they face. So it would be great to start and ask about that context and some of the challenges you're facing day to day, especially in the light of the last 18 months. So if I could ask Jonathan just to kind of give us a background to Gloucester Academy, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, no problem at all. So I joined here with Gloucester, with Greenshaw Learning Trust the 1st of June last year. Historically, the results in the school have been pretty poor. They're the 17th worst results in the country 2 years ago for Progress 8. So it just gives you an understanding of the sort of levels that students are leaving the school at. What we found first of all in maths, there was just too many students were missing the basic fundamentals of numeracy, so they're unable to make progress in the curriculum because of that. So they might understand concepts of new topics, but then progress was continually just halted because they couldn't, say, multiply two numbers together. So the current year 7 group we've got on the programme, they struggled 6 weeks ago with 3 times 3. I went in yesterday, they're doing long multiplication. The teachers never taught it before, using just describing it without showing it on the board. And the students will be able to do long multiplications and 33 times 45 in a matter of seconds from not being able to do 3 times 3. So it's very much that's the sort of basic level we were at. For the corrective reading, again, poor literacy skills, and the students didn't really have a range of strategies that they allowed them to access words correctly, sort of particularly tier 2 words. So historically, absence, high rates of EAL, speakers, no record of any school improvement across the last 10 years, just made these issues worse. And then they used they would look for intervention strategies, which I think we really need to get away from the idea that DI is an intervention strategy. It's just a great strategy to use and embed and to give students a really good base to move to access the curriculum from. So we just wanted something that really had a permanent impact and provided results. So from previous experience in other schools for the last 5-6 years, I couldn't wait to get this program in place. And like you said, the year 7 students and year 8 students we've got on it are just bursting with energy and smiles, and their attendance is incredible now based on what they're achieving.
Great, fantastic. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Amina, can I ask you to just give us a background of the context you're working in at the moment and some of the challenges perhaps you face?
Yes, so I guess my point of view will be more from as a teacher from the classroom and delivering the DI maths. And it's very much similar to what Jonathan said. I really struggled with the low ability students who really lack that basic knowledge in maths and those key skills. And not just, they weren't just lacking the key skills, they were lacking the confidence. They were, they already think they're really bad at maths, and so they're not going to succeed. And so what's the point of these lessons? And all we were facilitating for them were the mainstream work. And it was always that struggle of how do we bridge that gap between, top sets and lower sets. So since DI came into our school, it was our head teacher that brought in DI. And I started training with DI for it's been 2 years now. And I found that with my confidence growing with DI and me believing in this, the students believe in it too. They are literally really confident in their math skills. We only, the way the book is, there's only 15% new content per lesson. And so a lot of the content is repeated. And because a lot of it's repeated, they retain that information. And so they believe in themselves that, oh, we can remember, we are good at this. And it boosts their confidence. And having them give core responses, I found that they're becoming more articulate. Yes, they might be saying what the teacher's telling them to say, but it's giving them words to remember and they've got now a bank of words in their head of how to express themselves. And now I'm finding it being like a good year or so with these students, that now they're able to express using their own words, not just what I'm telling them in the script.
Yeah.
So it's been really good, especially with maths.
Fantastic. Okay, so there's definitely kind of similarities there in the kind of students that you've been targeting with DI in terms of kind of the lower attaining students, which is really interesting. Now, Riska, I know you've had a little bit of a different experience, so could you explain to us that? That'd be great.
Yep, so I began implementing reading mastery 18 years ago with children with very, very significant needs that are often, needing more specialist interventions. So children with severe or moderate to severe autism, learning difficulties, and many other comorbid conditions as well. And so what we are a multidisciplinary clinic that implement a lot of education otherwise than the school programs, but also provide consultancy into schools for those with significant learning difficulties or challenging behaviour. And that's both within mainstream and specialist provisions. We are mainly working with DI programs at the primary level. And as a behaviour analyst, the DI programs, as Amina was saying, with the 15% new content, the motivation that the children get from a DI program, the call responding that's built in, has so many good effects on behaviour. So as a behaviour analyst, we're always sort of looking at the DI programs and thinking, well, it incorporates so many of the behavioural programs we'd be recommending to make sure that those students are attending and learning. So yeah, we've implemented reading mastery, connecting maths concepts, spelling mastery, language for learning. We've pretty much implemented most of the primary school curricula, and then we also have a few secondary students that we see that are working on corrective reading mostly.
Fantastic, thank you. So that's a nice intro to kind of the different contexts we face. And Jonathan, I know you've worked with DI for a long time, and in a series of different schools, and it would be really interesting to know kind of how you found out about DI and why it is that you are keep bringing it back into new schools that you come to.
Yeah, so we first came across it when I was a deputy head down in Poole at a place called Magna, and we, just as a school, we were very outward looking. We went and visited what we thought were very similar schools, similar intake of students and that sort of thing, and we came across it in a school in West London, and we saw it and we couldn't believe what we were watching. And what we'd already done at one point, we'd taken a group in year 7 that we basically set up almost like a small a year 6 class, but within year 7, and we had them kept separately, and they were taught by Susie Kudapas and Kev Siri, who are in the DI South Hub, and they took them, and it worked and it was fine, and they went back into classes in year 8, but we just felt, we were looking at working like a phonics program for them, and we were doing a lot of work with that. And we just weren't quite sure we were having enough impact. So what we wanted to do is have a look at something that was a bit more tried and tested, something that was really securely based on really sound pedagogy and research. So we started doing lots and lots of research. We came across this and came across the nifty site and thought this looks incredible. We wanted to look at literacy and numeracy as well, because often they come into secondary school and there's just this massive focus on literacy, which there should be, but often numeracy is ignored, and it's not, and then it takes too long we don't catch up on that quick enough. And then something that would support the rest of the curriculum in the school. So it was much about sort of how are we going to get our students to achieve as much as they possibly can, and the bonus from when we found it Magna, and if you ever meet Kevin Siri and Susie, I'm sure they'll tell you this, straight away we realised it completely and utterly upskilled the teaching staff as well. I'm almost thinking that every NQT and trainee that comes through the school should do the full 2-3 days training and actually run some DI classes, depending on whatever they go and do. So that's sort of what we were looking for. We saw the impact of it, and we saw the students and the confidence and the attendance and the sort of well-being of the students, and just how confident they could look you in the eye, they could talk to you, they could hold conversations, because they're just used to it. If you think about it, in a lesson, a student, even if you're cold calling and you're full on T-like and you're following all those those systems, how many times does a student actually get asked a question in the classroom directly? Once or twice? In obviously in a DI lesson, it's tens if not hundreds in a lesson, and that's more than they'll get in a whole term almost in all their subjects in all across the school. So that calling out and that recall is where you see it. And I think Amina said that about, they get very excited when they first start doing it, and then they jump back and have their hands crossed and they can't wait and they're trying to beat their points. So just the confidence of these students as well, to see them grow is one of the biggest things as well, the reason why I wanted to put it in the schools that I go to.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. And just to pick up on a few points there, I think some important things to say about directed instruction programs is one, that they're sequenced in that you can have almost a year's worth of lessons all set out for the teacher in advance, and so someone's already put the thought into what knowledge comes when, how exactly it should be taught, which questions students should be asked. So a lot of that heavy lifting in terms of what the correct instruction for students should be is already done for teachers. So everything's in place for your school to be successful. Another thing to say that Jonathan picked up is about how engaging it is for students. I mean, I didn't mention this at the start, but I'm also a trained teacher. And so I know what it's like to be teaching classes where some students, especially lower attaining students, might be sat in the classroom and have no engagement throughout the day. They might not ever be asked a question. They might not ever ask a question or do any work. And one of the prerequisites of direct instructions lessons is that students can be answering questions, once almost every 4 seconds in parts of the lesson. So it really is, super rapid in terms of how engaged students are with the lesson, how many questions they're answering, which I think speaks to one of the reasons why the programs are so successful. So I'm going to move on from kind of why we use DI, or what kind of challenges we're facing, and it would be really interesting to get to know what the process is like of choosing DI and then setting up to implement in your school. So Mina, I know that you've obviously gone through the training, so it'd be really useful for you to talk about what it's like to be working with McGraw Hill and with Nifty and with the DI hubs, and how you go from choosing a program to getting into the classroom to deliver your first lesson.
So my first experience with DI was 2 years ago, and I was asked to attend a 2-day conference and training, and I met Tamara. Now Tamara works for Nifty, the National Institute for Direct Instruction, and so she came from America, and it was her first time in England. And that was, when I met Tamara, that was the first time I had ever heard about direct instruction. Now Tamara is a lovely, very quirky American, and and she was very excited about direct instruction. And now I sat there during that 2 days, and I was really anxious. Like, I had already been teaching mainstream for a good 4 years. So this, you're not asking an NQT, someone who doesn't know anything about teaching. I felt as if, like, obviously I'm not an expert, but at that time I felt, yeah, I know my craft. And I believed in the non-DI system. So to ask someone who doesn't know anything about DI, who believes in the non-DI system, I wasn't sure how this was going to work. So we had that 2-day conference where Tamara, told us about the statistics. She, we did role plays, we worked on it, but a lot of it was about me overcoming my anxiety of how am I going to deliver this? How am I going to follow this script when I like being the one choosing what words I want to use in my classroom? I'm the expert on my subject. And I thought that independence will be taken away from me. And the thing is, I'm meeting teachers now who want to implement DI and who's also have the same fears. So that's why I'm telling you about this, because there's going to be a lot of people who are going to feel that. And yeah, as much as you want to do what's best for the kid, you also feel you are what's best for the kid. So when I started DI, so after that training, I was in summer holiday, it was a 2-day intensive course. Then we started in September. And how you start DI is you give them a placement test. Now, this placement test looks at key skills that the students So it looks at basically with the corrective maths, it looks at basic skills. Now, anything that the students get wrong, the errors, you count up those errors, and that's when you highlight what the students can't do. And then they will be, you group those students together according to the missing skills, and that's really important. And you put them in a class together, and then you will deliver the book on the missing skills. Now, usually in a mainstream school, how we group students together is according to target grades. So students could be, you know, literally your classroom could be filled with mixed ability group, and you're given groups of students who are all meant to get a target 4 or a 5. But you don't know what they know, what they don't know. So having all students who have missing the same skill is, first thing, that's a brilliant start to have. And then I remember starting it off, and it will take a good few weeks for you to, you know, figure out the script, for you to figure out your personality within the classroom of DI. But I'm honestly telling you, it doesn't take away your independence. It doesn't take away who you are as a teacher. In fact, it's taught me how to be so concise with my instruction and not to blabber on, because that's what we do sometimes. And I know a lot of schools are doing explicit instruction, and it feeds into that. Now I've realized that with my other classes, because I do teach non-DI classes, I use a lot of direct instruction methods, and it helps. I don't know if I answered your question, Sam.
No, that was fantastic. Yeah, no, it was great. So in terms of what I was, well, just to kind of make some key points there, it's really, really important that when you do choose a DI program, you go through the training offered by the aptly named NIFTI, which is the National Institute for Direct Instruction. And as Amina says, that there is training by people who come from the US, and I know that the DI hubs, so we've got the South Hub with Kevin and Susie, and then we've got the Central Hub with Chloe, will be offering more training. I know COVID is messed things up a little bit, but there is opportunities for teachers to be trained in how to deliver direct instruction. And I think that key point about the placement test is really, really important, because there's certainly some people who have heard of direct instruction and think, oh, I'll just buy reading mastery, grade whatever, and apply it to my kids. Or I've heard of schools who've just taken their whole year 7 and just given them kind of blanket DI. And that's not going to work, quite frankly. You need to do these placement tests. They're a core part of how DI works. And so they place students in the right program and ensure that the instruction is based on their levels. And that's when it's most effective. If they've got that placement test, if they've got a trained teacher, if they follow the script, you're going to have a really positive experience with DI. And so that's certainly something to kind of keep in mind.
Sorry, Sam, just to add on, not to talk too much.
No, go for it.
So even after that, I mean, it's not just the 2-day conference. I had DI Jane from George Eliot School, who came in once a week. So she came in for 2 hours of my lesson for a good 6 months. And, you know, you still need that proper support from someone who is, and she had been delivering DI for a good 3 years. And she really supported me in that. If she hadn't coached me and wasn't there, like I had to watch her with my own group. And she spent, even after those 2 hours when she had finished, you know, it was a very friendly observation, and there was a lot of team teaching in there. We would then spend hours talking about it, talking about what went well, what went wrong, how I could improve, what were the kids like, and every day was different with the students. So it's really, really important that you have that support, and you can't just read a book or go for one conference and think you're going to deliver DI. It doesn't work that way, in my opinion.
Yeah, totally agree. Thank you, Amina. So Riska, I know you've had a very different kind of experience. It's not been classroom based. You've been working almost one-on-one with lots of students. And so it would be really interesting to preface this question. There's lots of research which has talked about how valuable DI can be, especially for students that have more complex needs. And so it'd be really interesting to hear from you about the kind of transformations you've seen in your students and how they've taken to sitting in a classroom and having to deal with scripted instruction and choral response, because often I think people would suggest that that's not the environment you want to put students with those kind of complex needs into. So how have you found that?
So we do work with a lot of individuals on a one-on-one basis, as I say, because they've got EOTAS programs. And with those students, they have often got multiple diagnoses and are quite complex. And some of the transformations we've seen with those students have been just unbelievable, you know, going from a child that has just learned, you know, to actually communicate and develop speech, to a child then within the space of a couple of years that's suddenly reading fluently. And these students may not be wanting to read for enjoyment, for fiction. They are quite considerably developmentally disabled individuals, but the reading ability has enabled them to access extra behavioural supports, because some of these children display quite significant challenging behaviour. Some of them previously have displayed aggression, self-injury, etc. And when they're then able to read, they can use things like written schedules. So, you know, visual schedules are great, but if you're caught out in the middle of somewhere and just need to write a list on your phone so as they know what's happening, the ability to read has meant that they can access those types of visual supports. And it's been unbelievable to see that effect, that them being able to read can open all of these doors to behavioural contracts and other behavioural supports. With our young people that have then been able to go into mainstream, there's one young girl we've been working with at the moment. We've taught her to taught her to read using Reading Mastery. And now actually she's been able to go into a school and start on the school program. It's a school that doesn't use DI, but she's been actually gone into this school and gone into quite a high set, which again, they were absolutely amazed with, considering her diagnosis, that she's actually so able in the area of reading and language. And now we're actually implementing connecting maths concepts with her, because she isn't able to access the maths program that they're doing in the school, because she actually thrives on that structure and sequence of the lessons. And so we're seeing children that are actually, the expectations of them were far lower, and then once we've implemented these programs, suddenly everybody around them is realizing just how much they have the capacity to learn.
Amazing, thank you, Riska. Yeah, I mean, you hear some amazing stories about how well students are brought on by DI, and often, you know, we have low expectations of students based on labels we put on top of them or on them. And I know what is in Engelman's work throughout is the problems with that. And, you know, is a often quoted Engelman phrase, which is that if the student hasn't learned, the teacher hasn't taught. And I think that's a really, you know, useful way of viewing DI, is that we place the full expectation on children to learn on the teacher. And any child, regardless of their background, regardless of any of their needs or their labels, can learn with appropriate instruction, appropriate placement, and appropriate teaching, which is what the DI programs will give your students, regardless of how challenging you think it might be to teach them in a classroom, which I think is amazing. So I want to get into some of the more nitty-gritty kind of timetabling things, which is very exciting. So Jonathan, it would be really interesting to find out about what a year 7's day looks like for some of your students using DI. So I guess the first question is it all of your students in year 7 and 8 that are learning via DI? Is it some of them? What's the kind of setup at Gloucester Academy?
Yeah, so we actually have year 7, year 8, and some year 11 students on the course as well. So what we do in year 7 and 8, they do for corrective reading, we do the NGRT test to start with, and then screen students that way, and then take students from there and test them using the placement testing for DI. And in maths, we do a similar sort of test that we use as Greenshaw as a start of year 7 test, and then we screen students from there. And it's like, I think someone's mentioned already, that it's absolutely about getting the key students on the right course as well, because there might be other reasons why the students can't access certain things. So we use we use that for DI placement tests. And once we've done the DI placement tests, we actually use their dedicated English or maths lesson for it. So we set the students here anyway in sets 1 to 7, 1 to 8, and then every 12 weeks they're retested and they're moved up and down groups. But the DI group is absolutely fixed, so they're in that group for the whole year, so they know they are. It's the first week or two, they're, you know, especially in year 7 when they're doing it for the first time, it's a little bit trickier to get them involved and get them on the course. And then they absolutely love it because they are, like we say, they're involved, they're actually learning, they're chanting, their choral response, there's huge smiles and everything else. But it's absolutely about grouping them, giving them the timetable time. What we're finding in, say, maths, they're doing the DI, I'm sure someone will tell me I'm doing this wrong, but we do they'll do the maths DI lesson, and sometimes, depending on how long that lesson is in the book, sometimes they'll stop, and then they'll actually do the normal maths lesson that the group next door is doing at the same time. So all the maths lessons run at the same time. And the students, we're finding, are just getting through those lessons so much quicker as well, because of the pace of the lesson coming from DI back into the sort of the more mainstream lessons that the other students are taking. They're pushing through those quicker in maths. So that's how we're doing it. But we're absolutely at the start of the year. I've got it in my curriculum. I've got it in my curriculum planning for staffing. I've got it in the timetable, and we have absolute fixed DI groups, and they know they're fixed and protected in there for at least 1 year in year 7 and or year 8. So normally they would go through. But it is absolutely about the SLT team, the senior team, saying this is what we want. And that's what Amina said, her head teacher, Anima said her head teacher absolutely wanted this. And it does, it has to come, it has to absolutely come and be fed through. The other thing we're doing now as well to support this is to make sure that all the other students, I feel like they're students, the other teachers in the school are actually spending some time watching the DI lessons, because they just hear this thing called DI is happening, but we're trying to get them in to actually watch the lessons and see what's going on. So best possible setup for the students, timetabling, restaffing undertaken, and making sure that we've got the best possible time allocated and protected for students. There's 4 DI English groups and 1 DI maths class in year 7 currently.
Great. And just so I've got this right, you've got a couple of lower attaining groups in each year group, or in 7 and 8 doing this DI, and they don't have any kind of normal, they're not studying Macbeth or Shakespeare, they're just doing DI in their English and maths lessons. And then they still do this wider curriculum. It's not like you keep them in a DI class and they don't get to see the rest of the school. They're still doing everything else. Is that right? Yeah,
so they still then have English, maths, science, DT, PE, everything else is in that group, but around the school. So because the way we group students, we use Gloucester because it's Gloucester Academy, we use Gloucester as the set, so 7 G L O U C E S T. So we work like that, and then they're taught each group, so 7G, especially because of the bubbles, they're taught in that group for all their subjects, and it's the same all the way through for the DI groups as well. So the only difference is the DI groups, they can't be moved up or down when we do the testing at the end of each unit. They are a protected group for the whole of the year.
Okay, fantastic. That's really good to know. Right, so that's the timetabling side of things. I think that's a pretty common way that lots of schools use DI. And again, especially at secondary, it's often seen as an intervention tool, and it's a really valuable intervention tool. But as I said, don't just see it as an intervention tool. At primary school, if you do talk to Nifty, they can share timetables of how their school day works, and there is as much encouragement to use DI for your higher attaining students as your lower attaining students, because your higher attaining students fly. They if they've already got really strong background knowledge from whatever source, they're going to pick up that reading really quickly. They're going to have great background knowledge, and you're really going to help them out in all sorts of ways. So don't be kind of put off by the idea that it's only for as an intervention tool. Having said that, what would be really useful is to understand the kind of what is going on in the DI lesson, because I know we've talked about there being 15% review or 15% new content, 85% review. Talks about behavior improving and pace improving, and I know there's some specific strategies that you're taught in order to help with the pacing and the behavior of the lesson. So Amina, it would be really useful if you could explain to us what a standard DI lesson looks like from when the students get to the door or get to their seats to when they sit down and leave the classroom, and kind of what strategies you're using there as well.
So the teacher will have a script, and that script will follow the student's workbook, and each student has their own workbook. So literally there's no printing for the teacher, there's no resources that you need to make, everything's there for you. You just have to know your script really well. The most important thing for the student to skill for them to have and learn during those DI lessons is their listening skills. They really need to listen very carefully to the teacher, your instructions, what you're saying to them. Now, in order for you to get your core responses, and you can do a practice session before those, before you start teaching the content. So you will give them an instruction to, it could be, I'm going to use a really easy example. So for example, if I say to them 3 + 2, okay, 3 + 2 = 5. And then I will say to the students, okay, you're going to repeat after me. And then you'll give them, in order for them to give you that core response, you'll give them a signal. A lot of people use different kind of signals in order for the students to hear that signal and then for them to repeat it. So I use just this tapping sound on my desk. Some teachers click, but I just clicking, I can't click. So yeah, so I just use a tapping sound. As soon as they hear that tapping sound, just one tap, they know that now they have to repeat whatever I've said. So I will say 3 + 2 = 5. Then I'll make the tap sound, and then they will say 3 + 2 = 5. Obviously, the content is a little bit more harder than that. So the book that I'm doing is division. So we'll start off with really basic division. So when I said about 15% new content, so the book starts off with whole numbers, dividing by whole numbers, single digit. And we will spend some like literally it'll be like one task on that, and then there'll be like a problem solving question. So they'll have to read something. So still be on division, but just a different scenario of it. So they'll read something where someone went to a shop and bought, a 5p, a sweet. And it won't even ask them to write down the mathematical fact. It will just be for them to just listen and to read. Then after that, it will be like, okay, now this scenario, make it as a multiplication fact. After that, we will then move on to looking at dividing with a decimal, and then we'll be looking at remainders, and then it'll get to like 3 digits, so bigger. And the students don't even realize how difficult the work gets, because it's so nicely, it's so gradual. And scaffolding in such a nice way. Yeah, so again, so how you get core responses is with a signal. So get all students to repeat back. I do tell the students that, we have to have some ground rules. So no screaming, no shouting, we all have to, stick together. We're a team. So we all sit together, and we really have to listen for that signal. Now, how do you get students to, listen to you and to follow those rules? We have a student teacher game. So if I give them a signal and they repeat, they give the core response before the signal, so then I will get a teacher point. But if they do it really nicely and they do it properly, and they wait for the signal, then it gets student point. And at the end of the session, what you're trying to do is you're getting the students to have more points than the teacher. And it works with low ability because they get very competitive. And then sometimes if this, they will tell each other off if someone's not following the rule. And what you can then do, I follow the point system, because we don't use point system in our school. We use something like hearts. So I then convert every 5 points becomes 1 heart, because if I give them 1 heart, like it's going to be too many hearts. So I'll say to them every 5 points is 1 heart, and they get really enthusiastic about it, and then they'll follow the rules. And then within that, you have the whole behavioral system where if they finish their tasks, they sit up straight, they put the pen down, then I know they're finished. And we have something called smart points, which is like if one student can be so good that they'll give the rest of the class a point for that. So everybody wants to be the one to give smart points to the rest of the group. So yeah, that's how it works in the classroom.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you so much. I guess the one question from a teacher's perspective, and this is, I mean, I'm not in the classroom now, and I guess one of the things that I struggled with in the class was planning and having to recreate a lesson each time I did it. And can you tell me, with DI, what is your planning like, and what's it like reading from a script? Is that something you struggle with? And, you know, how does it affect your lesson planning, Amina?
My planning has decreased so much since doing DI lessons. DI lessons are my favorite lessons now, because all I need to do is just read that book and that's it. And literally, I have tried to pick up the pace a bit more. So I will cover. So the book is like, it goes within lessons. You'll have lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3. And I make a slight competition with the students. I say to them, let's try and do 2 lessons today. Let's try and do 2.5 lessons today. I have some good days where we will finish 2.5 lessons. I have some, you know, rainy, bad days. If it's raining outside and there's thunder, which has been happening lately, we'll only cover half a lesson. But my planning has, like, the time I used to spend hours planning a lesson. Now I spend 5 minutes, yeah, just reading. And because I have 2 groups, so I only have to read for that one group, and then because I already know what's happening for the other group, and we're like on par, I don't have to do anything for the other group. I just have to go into that lesson and just read the script. So that's it. No printing. The books are given to them. That's it. I just have to be, you know, in the lesson, I'll have a pen with me. Sometimes I might have to, with the primary one, because I did the primary one 2 years ago, they already have a CD and everything's written on the board. With the secondary one, some of the answers you'll have to write on the board, but literally you have an answer book and you're just copying on the board. That's it. That's 5 minutes planning. I think that's what teachers want to hear these days.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I want to hear. Yeah, I think that's a significant benefit to students. I think that's a good question that's just come in from Christina McGee, and certainly sometimes I think this. Are you learning the script like an actor and then repeating it from memory, or are you standing with it at the front of the classroom? And if so, what's it like standing at the front of a classroom with the script?
So I have the script in front of me, and the school's given me a music stand, which, you know, at first I found it really funny, but if the kids get used to it, you get used to it. So literally you'll be standing there, and I'll just read it to them, and that's it. And, you know, how you want to pace your words and how you want to, I do sometimes feel I am acting because I'm reading from the book. I do, you know, change my voice a bit. I do emphasize on things a bit more compared to before I did DI. I wasn't very expressive with my words. I have become a lot more expressive with them because I feel like with these kids, they need to hear keywords. So I'll emphasize those keywords, or I'll talk really slowly those keywords. But yeah, that's it. All I'm doing is I've got a music stand in front of me. I've got the script and I'm just reading the script to them according to the rhythm that they want it at.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's a really important point as well there, because I was speaking to a colleague of mine who is at Uplearn, and he was telling me that he hadn't had any training when he first taught direct instruction, and he had the script in front of him, and not knowing what DI was, he would go through and think, oh, they don't need to know this, they don't need to know that, I'll skip this part, which for, you know, I don't want to say DI aficionados, but that makes my heart like kind of curl up a little bit, and I get a bit scared because you really, you know, it's really key. These words are said in the way they're given to you, which sounds overly prescriptive and problematic, but I think the proof is in the pudding with student results. And you know, just to give some background to why it's so important to read the scripts, you know, Engelman and the Nifty team have spent years producing these programs, and they rigorously field test these. They test them and test them and test them on classrooms of students to ensure that 90% of students understand 90% of all the concepts in each program, and only when they hit that ridiculously high barrier are they willing to publish the program for schools to use. And so when teachers decide to go off script, which is understandable, they're really kind of making it harder for their own students to learn, because so much thought and so much time has been put in to making the instruction what Engelman would call logically faultless. So yeah, I think it's a key point.
It is very tempting when you first start. So I'll be very honest with you. When I first started, I was tempted. Oh yeah, I don't need to say this bit. Let me skip it. Obviously, at that time, I didn't really understand or love DI and Engelman's work as much as I do now. And that was something very tempting. And I was like, who would know, right? But I was really glad that I had Jane with me in the class, because she made sure that I read every single word from that script. And it's only when I finished that year off did I realize how important every word is. And sometimes when the students would make a mistake, I wouldn't ask the whole class to repeat, because I just felt like I just want to get on with the lesson. But it is really important, if the students don't understand it, to repeat that that section again. Any errors to, we call them A errors, to, get them to repeat it as core responses. And it works. Like, from someone who's from the other side, who did feel, oh, it's not so important, I can skip these, the little bit, it's not necessary. No, it really is. And you need to, go through that script as it is, and it works. It really does.
Great, thank you so much, Amina. I'm worried that we're running out of time, but I'm just going to keep talking anyway. So one thing I wanted to just focus on was behaviour, because I know that, or I hope I'm right in saying that there's a specific nifty acronym that is for behaviour. And I hope I don't put you on the spot risk about asking you how you found, and maybe you even don't use the acronym at all, but how behaviour for your students and DI kind of intertwine, and whether or not you've used any strategies given to you by Nifty for that.
So what we found is that actually a lot of the behavioural principles are embedded throughout the DI programs anyway. So what you're looking at is high rates of responding, making sure you get fluent responding. They're all embedded in it. High rates of success. So a lot of errorless teaching is built in, because you start, as Amina said, you start by saying, copy me, 3 + 2, you're going to say it, that's where you're at. So there's a lot of errorless teaching built in. So a lot of the principles from behavior analysis for maximizing appropriate behavior within classrooms and for us with one-to-one students are already built in. So we often find that some simple point systems like Amina described is all that is needed. And what she described, such as the points for the teacher versus points for the student, is a perfect example. We'll often do that even in the one-to-one basis. We find that the behavior of students taking part in DI lessons is exceptional, particularly because they know what's coming, they know the structure as well, but they don't get bored of the structure because novelty is built into each lesson. So each part of the lesson is something slightly different. So although within the lessons you've got repetition, as you get repetition of the content, each lesson is structured in such a way that it maximizes their attending, and they've got that flow. And what's great as well is you use different learning channels. So you've got learning channels of where they're listening and then repeating, but then also, for example, in reading mastery, you move on to the workbooks and then they're actually performing written tasks. And the other great thing we found with DI is that we work with a lot of teaching assistants. We are often not working in schools that are implementing it as a whole class. And so we're actually implementing this often as an intervention, but with primary children. And because of the scripts, we are finding that teaching assistants absolutely love it as well. The teachers will support them doing it, we'll support them doing it, but the teaching assistants are really able to make a difference and implement it exceptionally well.
Fab. That sounds perfect, and it's great. As I say, there's an interesting parallel and then a conversation around the research behind direct instruction, which isn't something we've got in today. But obviously, Riski's background is as a behavior analyst and not as a teacher, so you can kind of attest to the importance of the behavioral analysis within Engelman's work. But from a cognitive science perspective, if that's what you're into as a teacher, all these things that we talk about that are that are exciting at the moment in teaching, things like Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve or cognitive load theory, or dual coding, or name whatever you want. These ideas have been popular now maybe for 5 or 10 years, widely popular in teaching. And yet Engelmann's programs were first produced in the 60s, and he had of none of these things. And yet all of them are included there, and they're all combined, and they have other really interesting devices which Engelmann uses to teach concepts. And so not only do you have the evidence of what you've heard today from each of our panelists about why DI can be so effective, not only do you have the behavioral side of things, but if you scratch your finger beneath what's actually going on in the lesson, you'll see that there's so much what we now understand to be research-based ideas in there that makes these lessons so effective. One of them being, 85% review is perfect for Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve, or things like rule number 1 of Rosenshine's principles of instruction. So it's all there, and that's why I'm slowly getting more and more excited as I sit in my chair. Right, before we crack on and finish, because there's about 3 minutes left, I'm going to answer this question first. Is there a DI program specifically for science, English, science subjects at GCSE and A-level? Unfortunately not. Because it's primarily kept to maths and English. So there's a no there. However, if you are looking for a learning provider that uses Engelmann's theories to provide A-level science content, then I could happily direct you to Uplearn, who use Engelmann's work on a daily basis. And we have biology, chemistry, physics, maths, economics, psychology. Take a look. I'd be happy to discuss it with you. Right, to finish, it'd be great to get like a bit of advice, really, like a key piece of advice about what to do next if you're here and you really want to take on DI. So starting with Jonathan, can you just give any kind of closing salvos?
Yeah, be careful. It's not something you're looking to fix. That's the problem. People come and use DI sometimes because they feel there's a problem that they need to fix. It's more about looking at the outcomes that you're looking for with students. It's a bit more of a bigger and a deeper problem than fixing something. So, because students come to secondary life, particularly from all sort of walks of life, and inherit all sorts of problems. So it's got to be an absolute commitment, no bolt-ons, and it just absolutely revolutionises the way you see your students and how you teach your student. If you're following the programme, like I think you've already said earlier, you talked about with the books, follow it exactly, absolutely follow it, get yourself trained properly and do it. And my final tip would be, you were just talking about it earlier, is to buy one of these. They're £1 from Amazon, and they're little dog training clickers. There you go, that's what we use, little clickers like that. There you go.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks so much. Amina, any closing thoughts from yourself?
So if you do start DI, enjoy it. Don't overthink it. It's very fun in the classroom, and you'll see the students, that spark in the eyes. You'll see them enjoying it. And remember, it's not about just getting them some target grades. It's more wholesome than that. It's about building their confidence. It's about them having skills for life, and you'll see the students blossoming. You'll see them becoming a lot more confident, and it's a great journey, especially if you are already a subject specialist. You do definitely need to get trained for how to deliver DI.
Thank you so much, Amina. Riska?
Yeah, I'd probably say that, if you're in specialist intervention, really do look at those children that have struggled to learn to read, that you think maybe won't be able to learn to read, and actually DI can make that difference. DI can get these children that have struggled with lots of other programs and have lots of difficulties and special needs and diagnoses to actually be able to achieve this. So it's not only applicable to mainstream and for intervention purposes, it's applicable to specialist provisions as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. There's a few questions in the Q&A box, which we haven't been able to get to, but I know that we will be responding to them in writing, which sounds very formal, but I will write something and there will be a response. So do keep putting questions into the Q&A box if you have anything additional you'd like to ask. I guess the thank you so much for coming is the first thing I'd like to say. And the second thing is that if this is something you've been inspired by and you would really like to take DI forward in your school, firstly, you can follow each of these panelists, almost like contestants, Riska, Amina, and Jonathan on Twitter, and I'm sure they'll have some time to answer questions. if you would like to buy the programs and be involved in that, talk to not Amina, sorry, you can talk to Amina, or talk to Emma, is what I meant to say, or Parveen, and they will be able to go through all of the hoops, because there are some complex bits and bobs, but they make them so simple and so easy, so it'll be fantastic. Otherwise, again, thank you so much for coming, and I will hand back over to Parveen, I think.
Yes, thank you, Sam, and thank you to all of our speakers. Honestly, that was such an engaging session. It was really great to see everybody talking in the chat box and listening in intently. Got some really great nuggets from that, so thank you so much. As Sam said, you can definitely contact us with any questions. Obviously, we're running over slightly, so we didn't quite get to the Q&A session, but any questions that you do have, please do feel free to send them to Emma. Her contact information is on the screen right now, and I believe it's going to make its way into the chat box very soon as well. Any questions you do have about DI, please do send it through, and we can share it with Sam, Riska, Amina, and Jonathan. We can get answers for you to those. Or if you would prefer to just have a chat with Emma or I, we can definitely do that as well. Other ways for you to stay connected with us, we have our page on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. And we also have another email address where you can send any questions to, which is just on the bottom there. And of course, our website for you to, if you've still got some research that you want to do on DI, all of our programs are on the website for you to have a read about, and contact us with any other queries. So that's it from us. Again, as Afsana said beforehand, we have recorded this session and we will be sharing it with you all in a few days' time, so you can watch back or you can share it with your colleagues. And please do keep being enthusiastic about DI. Honestly, the conversation surrounding it today has been amazing, and we want to keep that momentum going. So thank you so much, and have a lovely rest of the day.